Let's get to part 2 of this episode. What happens when you take, again, we're going to say a couple months off. Hasn't quite been that long, but about 8 weeks. What happens when you take that time off? Since that time, if you look at my numbers now, numbers being downloads or whatever we're going to call them, 50% drop in download numbers. Let me give you my thoughts on why. Most people who listen to this podcast, and maybe your podcast, and maybe you when it comes to this podcast, I've got regular listeners, and without new content, there's not anything to download. And because of that, they don't download anything. They've already downloaded it. They've already heard what I've got. They're not going to download it again. You might have heard the phrase, publish or perish. They tell that to college professors, people looking to make a name for themselves. It applies to you as a podcaster. You need to continuously put out new episodes. Maybe you can boost numbers, not necessarily listener satisfaction, not necessarily listeners, by re-releasing podcast episodes. I don't know. I don't like to do that. I only like to release new content. My suggestion for you, if you want to keep your numbers up, probably don't take too long off. Maybe a couple weeks, a week. I don't know. Not 8 weeks. If you go away too long, people forget about you. You're like those bands that I was talking about. Those bands where you look them up. You're like, oh, those guys are still around? That's going to be you. Is that guy still doing a podcast? Yeah, but only when he feels like it. Don't be that guy. You want to release content pretty frequently. Here's another reason why your numbers will probably drop if you stop putting out consistent episodes. If somebody does find a new podcast, and that podcast happens to be yours, and he sees that it's been a few weeks since the latest episode, what's he going to think? He's likely not to bother. What happens with a house that has been on the market for a while? People think something's wrong with it. People think there's a reason that it hasn't sold. Even realtors stop showing that house because they've maybe shown it, it hasn't sold. They know other realtors have shown it, it hasn't sold. You're in the same situation when you don't put out new episodes. If somebody finds a podcast and the last episode was 8 weeks ago, a year ago, 3 years ago, think, it's not up to date. It's not going to be worth me listening to. And if I do like it, I'm going to be disappointed because they're not putting out new stuff. We feel the same way about software. Consider that. More importantly, consider this. If you want to be known as a podcaster, you need to podcast. Don't be that guy, the singer who doesn't sing songs, the songwriter who doesn't write songs, the author who doesn't write books. He's in the coffee shop talking about how he's going to write a book, but he's not writing books. Musicians who don't play gigs. Don't call yourself a podcaster if you're not going to podcast.